In terms of horror films, Wes Craven is a well-known figure who is credited for revolutionizing the horror genre and creating some of the most terrifying and iconic horror characters of all time, including Ghostface and Freddy Krueger. He was also responsible for years of scaring audiences with his manipulative storytelling style, which kept them guessing what would happen next. He also helps his performers achieve stardom, including Johnny Depp, who had his first major part in 1984 as Glenn Lance in the original Nightmare on Elm Street film. When it comes to my experience of Wes Craven's films, I have seen probably a few of them, such as the first couple of Scream films and Nightmare on Elm Street. I quite enjoyed those films as they are iconic in the horror genre and film in general. For this essay, I will be discussing Wes Craven's filmography, personality, as well as his director style, and how that applies to the auteur theory. To start off with, we will be going through what auteur theory is and some of the issues with it, as it will be important for later. An auteur is a unique filmmaker whose artistic qualities are immediately and clearly identifiable in their productions. The first few minutes of the movie will allow the audience to determine this. There are three components to auteur theory. When Andrew Saris expanded on the original text by Trufant, he laid out a more detailed definition for auteurs according to three main sections: technical competence, distinguishable personality, and interior meaning. Some of the issues with auteur theory come down to the amount of control and credit that the director has on the filmmaking process. As times have changed, more and more people work on films. That's why we have an entire part of the film for credits, to show who has worked on it. The problem is that the director should not be credited for things that other people have done, since they have put their work into it, not as much as the director has. This essentially made a small divide in the filmmaking community. This basically is auteur theory could have a different meaning depending on the person. Going back to Wes Craven, he was born in Cleveland, Ohio on the 2nd of August 1939. He grew up in a disorganized and dysfunctional family. His father passed away from a heart attack a year after his parents divorced, when he was 4 years old. His own words were, "By my 5th birthday, I had been exposed to a lot of anger and to death." The family of Craven were not very wealthy, yet they were devout Christians. Craven occasionally read comic books or watched films. Later on in Craven's life, it would become more challenging throughout these years. His financial situation was unstable because he was working as a teacher and as a taxi driver, in addition to his employment as a messenger. All of this stress continued into his marriage, which had finally resulted in a 1969 divorce. When Craven was given credit as an editor in the comedy You've Got to Walk It Like You'll Talk It or You'll Lose That Beat in 1971, things started to change for him. He also served as a producer on the movie Together that year. Here, he would meet Sean Cunningham, the director of Friday the 13th. He eventually was the producer of The Last House on the Left, Craven's future debut. Moving on to his filmography, Craven had quite a bumpy road when it came to his later projects. Not all of them were bad, but not all of them were good either. The Last House on the Left received a lot of poor reviews from critics when it was premiered in the theatres. Although people also supported the movie, Roger Ebert was one of those people. Many made the conscious decision to strongly avoid anything directed by Craven after learning that he was the one behind this despised movie. After a 5-year hiatus, Craven worked with Cunningham on non-horror pieces that were not very popular or successful. With publication of The Hills Have Eyes in 1977, Craven would eventually return to the horror genre. With his persistent use of dark, twisted plots, a normal average family struggling for their lives in the forest against a clan of cannibals, Craven's gritty approach was particularly evident in this movie. The film's editing, which is quick and frightening, and its soundtrack, which is notable for standing out against the music of other Craven films, are both overlooked. The soundtrack was composed by Don Peake and pairs well with the horrific tone of the film's events. Robert Burns, the art director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, whose film features certain similarities to his own, is another significant component of his work. Then, in 1982, Craven ventured into a slightly different genre with Swamp Thing, which was essentially his take on mainstream film. For the first time, Craven demonstrated his ability to handle action, romance, and a less graphic horror film, and he was successful in doing so. Despite its lack of box office success, the movie was nevertheless regarded as a true cult classic. A lot of people enjoyed the movie, particularly the soundtrack and the comic book transitions. A Nightmare on Elm Street was Craven's next film. It was first produced by a different company before being acquired by New Line Cinema, which specialized in publishing and distributing movies rather than making them. As a result, Craven was given a great deal of creative freedom, which contributed to the movie's enormous success. The film's supernatural themes and central notion of the dream state, which originated from Craven's personal experience of writing about his own dreams and was dubbed the rubber reality because it blurred the boundaries between dream and reality through a combination of ideas and imagery, likewise added to the film's frightening elements. As well, Craven used a great deal of religious imagery into the movie, which was another aspect from his own life. People also appreciated the character of Freddy because, unlike in his later films, he would be portrayed as a more comedic figure. In the initial film, he lurked in the shadows and left the viewer wondering about his true identity. In addition, Johnny Depp made his acting debut in the movie, demonstrating Craven's ability for choosing talented young performers. In an attempt to maintain the momentum after Nightmare on Elm Street, he worked on Deadly Friend. Because the studio had much less control over Craven's production, things were thrown together and the final product had a plot full of unstructured sequences aimed to please the audience rather than to be a well-made movie. Following the film's release, he worked on a few more projects such as The Serpent and the Rainbow, which was a little better, but employed some of Craven's rubber reality method from the Nightmare on Elm Street. After that, Craven produced A Vampire in Brooklyn, which served as the prototype for his next work, Scream, which combined horror and comedy aspects. Because it uses references to the slasher genre, which was getting stale at the time of the film being created, the narrative itself expanded upon what Craven had already done in this decade, but at a higher level. Kevin Williamson deserves a great deal of credit for writing this film's original dialogue. He also created compelling teenage characters by frequently using slasher horror cliches, which both helped the movie stand out and made the characters smarter. As you move more into the 2000s, Craven moved to more personal works. My Soul to Take, which took inspiration from one of Craven's unpublished works as a student. At this point, he was also getting close to 70 years old, and the movie dealt with ideas of life after death, while also getting more complex as it progressed. The movie, meanwhile, wouldn't be his last. With a number of references to the earlier films, and a new cast of actors revisiting roles from the older actors, Scream 4 was essentially the perfect way to wrap up the original trilogy. While My Soul to Take seemed a little out of date for when it came out, Scream 4 conformed closely to the horror conventions of that time. With its meta-storytelling and distinct aesthetic, the cast appears to be more distant from violence since they are always on social media and their phones. It also managed to retain a lot of its charm. This movie flawlessly reboots the classic films for a modern audience while building upon them. There are several factors that would classify Wes Craven as an auteur when it comes to his work. First, know how frequently he makes his use of situational lighting. This was common in most of his films from the late 80s all the way up to the 2000s. Essentially, it's just a matter of switching up the light according to the circumstances. For instance, Nancy is dreaming in school in the opening scene of Nightmare on Elm Street. The lighting there remains bright and typical to match with the school atmosphere. But as the dream becomes more twisted, the lighting and the scene becomes increasingly harsh and filled with shadows. This brings us to another of Craven's own inventions, rubber reality. A horrific psychological image of a person existing on the edge between dreams and reality that was first employed in Nightmare on Elm Street and then in his other works. Since he had a lot of experience with dark, twisted religious imagery in his early youth, Craven also loves to incorporate a lot of his past experiences into his films, which is what gives them its gory, dark style. He is also well known for his storytelling. Many of his films feature significant plot twists and the overall narrative is groundbreaking, unconventional for the time it was being made. He also frequently features female leads in his films, who battle the killer and inevitably prevail over them by outwitting them. Despite his success in the horror genre, he also occasionally takes time aside to work on personal passion projects that delve into issues and genres outside of his regular scope. This demonstrates both his versatility as a director and his love for the medium of filmmaking. Additionally, Craven adores the use of gory practical effects, preferring them to computer-generated imagery. This was demonstrated during the production of Curse 2005, when he and Williamson worked on the project, and then the studio insisted on replacing the wolves with CGI, which resulted in a terrible final product. Throughout his work as a filmmaker, Craven has also been accustomed to practical effects, so that's why he's used to doing it. When it comes to his general demeanour, and another factor that classifies Craven as an auteur, is his unique personality and approach to filmmaking. Wes Craven strikes most people he works with as a calm, kind man who is both understanding of the people he works with and passionate about his work. When people first meet him, they are frequently taken aback by his demeanour, as they may assume he is a serious and bitter individual based on his work. When it comes down to it, auteur theory is one where, to your best understanding, you can distinguish a director's work by the easily recognisable aspects that are present throughout a variety of their films. To me, and from what I've gone through in this essay, I believe that Wes Craven is an auteur, and he has many instances and examples that from my understanding make him one, especially for what he has done to the horror genre and how he has revolutionized it.